It was a crisp morning on September 12, 2010, in the quiet beach city of Santa Clara, California. The scent of salt water lingered in the air, and the city was just beginning to stir. Residents of the coastal neighborhood of Pacific Shores were jolted out of their routine when police cars and ambulances rushed into the area, their sirens echoing off the beachfront homes. At 8:45 a.m., Lydia Palmer, a retired schoolteacher, called 911 after noticing her neighbor, 32-year-old Christine Harper, hadn't collected her newspaper, a habit she never missed. Out of curiosity and concern, Lydia had walked up to the Harper residence and found the front door slightly ajar. Inside, she saw an overturned coffee table and what appeared to be blood smeared on the floor. Santa Clara Police Department responded promptly. Detective Jack Rowland, a seasoned investigator with 20 years on the force, took charge. As he stepped into the Harper home, he was met with a scene of chaos. Furniture toppled, shattered glass scattered across the floor, and Christine lying motionless in the living room. A silk scarf was tied tightly around her neck, her lifeless eyes staring at the ceiling. Only 5% of those who watch my videos are subscribed. If you are enjoying my contents, please subscribe, as this helps me a lot. Thank you, and enjoy this video. Christine, a software engineer and avid surfer, was well loved in the community. Her friends described her as intelligent, kind, and ambitious. She had moved to Santa Clara 3 years earlier, seeking a fresh start after a difficult breakup. She had recently gotten engaged to Benjamin Ben Owens, a local real estate agent known for his charisma and charm. Detective Rowland immediately recognized that this would be a high-profile case. As officers canvassed the neighborhood, Ben arrived at the scene, visibly distraught. He claimed to have been at a client meeting when the crime occurred, but his emotional state made it hard to glean further details. Meanwhile, a bloodhound brought to the scene behaved strangely, barking incessantly at Ben, a detail that did not go unnoticed by Rowland. However, with no immediate evidence linking him to the crime, the focus shifted to collecting forensic evidence and interviewing anyone who might have seen something unusual that morning. Thus began the investigation into Christine Harper's tragic death, an event that would unravel secrets buried deep within the idyllic city of Santa Clara. Christine Harper grew up in Portland, Oregon, the only child of Henry and Margaret Harper. Her father, a retired firefighter, and her mother, a homemaker turned part-time librarian, had always been a strong support system for her. Christine excelled in academics, earning a scholarship to Stanford University, where she majored in computer science. After graduating with honors, Christine started a promising career in Silicon Valley. Her colleagues described her as brilliant yet humble, someone who could tackle complex problems with ease. Despite her professional success, Christine's personal life was less stable. In her late 20s, she had a long-term relationship with a tech entrepreneur, Ryan Carlisle, that ended bitterly after his infidelity came to light. The breakup left her guarded and hesitant to trust again. 3 years later, she relocated to Santa Clara to escape the reminders of her past and embrace the beach town's relaxed lifestyle. Surfing became her solace, and it was during a community beach cleanup event that she met Ben Owens. Ben, 6 years her senior, had a magnetic personality and a reputation for closing lucrative real estate deals. Ben came from a modest background, growing up in a small Texas town. His father, a mechanic, and his mother, a nurse, worked tirelessly to provide for him and his 2 siblings. Ben moved to California in his mid-20s, reinventing himself as a savvy businessman. To many, he was the embodiment of the American dream, a self-made success story. Their whirlwind romance quickly became the talk of the Pacific Shores community. Friends described their relationship as passionate but occasionally tense, with Christine's introverted nature clashing with Ben's larger-than-life persona. Despite these differences, Christine seemed happy and had recently announced their engagement at a neighborhood barbecue, showing off a sparkling diamond ring. Christine's parents, while supportive, had reservations about Ben. Margaret Harper once confided to a close friend that Ben seemed too polished, too eager to please. "There's something he's not telling us," she said. But Christine, head over heels, dismissed her mother's concerns as overprotectiveness. Unbeknownst to Christine, Ben carried secrets of his own. A failed marriage, financial troubles, and a history of brief yet intense relationships had followed him to Santa Clara. These details, which he carefully concealed, would soon come to light as the investigation unfolded. The morning of September 12, 2010, started unremarkably for Christine Harper. Neighbors saw her jogging along the beach trail around 6:30 a.m., as was her custom every Sunday. She waved to Lydia Palmer, her elderly neighbor, before heading home at around 7:15 a.m. Shortly after, a delivery driver confirmed dropping off a parcel at Christine's door, which she retrieved. At 7:45 a.m., Christine called her mother, Margaret, for their usual Sunday chat. According to Margaret, Christine sounded cheerful and mentioned she was planning a quiet day catching up on work. She was also preparing for an upcoming engagement party Ben had planned as a surprise for her. By 8:30 a.m., however, everything changed. A neighbor walking his dog reported hearing what sounded like an argument coming from Christine's home. The voices were muffled but distinctly tense. Minutes later, a loud crash echoed from inside the house, followed by an eerie silence. When Lydia Palmer found the door ajar around 8:45 a.m., the scene she discovered was nothing short of horrifying. Christine lay lifeless in the living room, her scarf tightly wrapped around her neck. The overturned furniture, scattered papers, and missing jewelry suggested a robbery turned deadly. Detective Jack Rowland and his team arrived swiftly, combing the scene for clues. A preliminary search revealed no signs of forced entry, which puzzled investigators. If this was a burglary, how had the perpetrator gained access? Christine's fiancé, Ben Owens, was contacted immediately. He arrived at the scene within 20 minutes, visibly shaken. Clad in a crisp suit, he explained he had been showing a property across town when he received the call. His alibi was corroborated by a client who confirmed meeting him earlier that morning. However, a critical moment occurred when the police brought in a bloodhound to trace potential scents. The dog repeatedly barked at Ben, raising quiet suspicions among the officers. Though Ben seemed cooperative and devastated, Detective Rowland noted subtle inconsistencies in his behavior, particularly his reluctance to make eye contact when answering questions about Christine's morning routine. The medical examiner determined that Christine's death was caused by strangulation. The time of death was estimated to be between 8:15 and 8:30 a.m., aligning with the reported argument. Despite these findings, the case lacked sufficient evidence to point to a clear suspect. Investigators collected fingerprints, fibers, and surveillance footage from the surrounding area, hoping for a lead. Meanwhile, the news of Christine's tragic death sent shockwaves through the close-knit community of Pacific Shores. Detective Jack Rowland and his team worked tirelessly in the days following Christine Harper's murder. The crime scene provided clues, but none seemed definitive. The lack of forced entry suggested the killer was someone Christine knew or trusted, but with no eyewitnesses and few immediate leads, the case was far from straightforward. The first priority was to interview those closest to Christine. Ben Owens, her fiancé, was brought in for questioning the day after the murder. Though visibly distraught, Ben recounted his activities that morning with precision. He claimed he had left their shared apartment at 6:45 a.m. to meet a client across town. His alibi, corroborated by the client and timestamps from surveillance footage at the property he showed, appeared solid. However, Detective Rowland couldn't ignore the bloodhound's unusual reaction to Ben at the crime scene. Christine's parents, Henry and Margaret Harper, also provided insights during their interviews. Margaret revealed a recent phone conversation in which Christine had expressed frustration over Ben's financial recklessness, particularly his penchant for extravagant purchases and unexplained withdrawals from their joint account. Margaret hesitated to call it a serious issue, but it painted a picture of underlying tension in their relationship. The investigation then expanded to Christine's social circle. Colleagues described her as private, with few close friends, but one coworker recalled her mentioning a mysterious call she received the week before her death. Christine reportedly seemed unsettled, though she did not share the details. Detectives traced her call records, finding a number registered to a prepaid phone a dead end for now. Forensic analysis of the crime scene yielded some promising evidence. Partial fingerprints were found on the overturned coffee table and the scarf used as the murder weapon. DNA testing began on these samples, but results would take weeks. Additionally, a faint shoe print was discovered near the back door, but it was too smudged to match to any specific brand or size. Christine's missing jewelry was flagged in pawn shops across the region. A list of items, including a vintage pearl necklace and a diamond bracelet, was circulated, though no immediate matches came up. While investigators pursued multiple angles, Ben Owens remained in the spotlight. His polished demeanor and charm did little to quell suspicions, particularly as his financial records revealed substantial debt. Credit card statements showed lavish purchases, but his real estate business had suffered significant losses in recent months. Further scrutiny revealed that Ben had a brief, tumultuous first marriage that ended in divorce. His ex-wife, when contacted, described him as charismatic but manipulative, with a tendency to hide his struggles behind a confident facade. She also hinted at bouts of volatility, though she insisted he was not violent. To ensure no angle was overlooked, detectives considered the possibility of an unrelated burglary gone wrong. The missing jewelry supported this theory, but the lack of forced entry suggested otherwise. They also explored Christine's ex-boyfriend Ryan Carlisle, who had recently moved back to California. Though Ryan denied any contact with Christine in years, his name raised eyebrows given their bitter breakup. Despite their efforts, concrete evidence remained elusive. The pressure mounted as weeks turned into months, and the once bustling investigation began to lose momentum. Still, Detective Rowland was convinced that the answer lay in Christine's inner circle. As weeks turned into months, the Santa Clara Police Department faced mounting pressure from the community and media to solve Christine Harper's murder. Detectives meticulously pursued leads, but none resulted in a breakthrough. Then, a surprising twist threw the investigation into disarray. Ben Owens, Christine's fiancé and a person of interest, disappeared without a trace. On November 10, 2010, nearly 2 months after Christine's murder, Ben was last seen leaving his apartment complex. Security cameras captured him carrying a small duffel bag, wearing casual attire, and appearing calm. Neighbors later reported seeing his car, a silver Lexus, leaving the parking lot around the same time. When Ben failed to show up for a scheduled real estate meeting later that day, his colleagues became concerned. Detective Jack Rowland and his team were alerted immediately. A search of Ben's apartment revealed no signs of a struggle or hastily abandoned belongings. His passport and primary credit cards were left behind, but investigators noticed an oddity. Recent activity on one of his lesser-used accounts showed purchases of camping gear, prepaid cell phones, and bus tickets in various cities along the West Coast. The investigation shifted gears as detectives worked to retrace Ben's steps. Surveillance footage from a Greyhound bus terminal in San Francisco confirmed that he had purchased a ticket to Seattle on November 10th. However, by the time investigators followed this lead, Ben had already vanished again. Over the following weeks, sporadic sightings of a man matching Ben's description were reported in small towns across Oregon and Washington. These tips led to dead ends, as Ben seemed to be one step ahead, using cash transactions and prepaid phones to avoid detection. His silver Lexus was eventually found abandoned in a remote hiking area near Mount Hood, Oregon. Inside the car, detectives found an empty water bottle, a crumpled bus ticket, and a receipt for a motel stay under an alias, Daniel Green. Ben's disappearance cast a shadow over the case. Public opinion was divided. Some saw him as a grieving fiancé who had been unfairly targeted, while others were convinced his disappearance was an admission of guilt. Christine's parents were vocal about their suspicions. If he was innocent, why would he run? Margaret Harper questioned in an emotional interview with a local news station. The case also strained the police department. Detective Rowland and his team faced criticism for not anticipating Ben's flight, despite the lingering suspicions about him. As the months passed, Ben Owens seemed to have vanished into thin air, leaving the investigation stalled and Christine's family in limbo. By mid-2011, the trail had gone cold. With no solid leads and the public's interest waning, the case was officially classified as a cold case. The Harper family continued to push for answers, working with private investigators and holding memorial events to keep Christine's story alive. Unbeknownst to them, the breakthrough they desperately sought would come years later, in the form of a phone call that would change everything. By 2015, 5 years had passed since Christine Harper's murder and the subsequent disappearance of Ben Owens. For the Harper family, time had done little to heal the wounds. Christine's parents, Henry and Margaret, continued to push for answers, though the case had long gone cold. Their once vibrant lives became consumed by the weight of unanswered questions and the pursuit of justice. Santa Clara, a city known for its picturesque beaches and tech-driven lifestyle, moved on from the tragedy. The media, which had initially covered Christine's murder extensively, shifted its focus to other stories. Occasionally, a local news outlet would run a brief piece on the case's unsolved status, but it rarely garnered much attention. Detective Jack Rowland, though officially retired, never stopped thinking about the case. There was always something nagging me about Ben, he would later tell reporters. He occasionally revisited the evidence, hoping fresh eyes might reveal a missed detail. However, with no new leads and limited resources, the case remained stagnant. Christine's parents refused to let her memory fade. Margaret Harper became an advocate for victims of unsolved crimes, speaking at events and pushing for legislative changes to support cold case investigations. Meanwhile, Henry Harper poured his grief into maintaining Christine's favorite beach trail, a quiet homage to her love of the ocean. The couple also hired a private investigator, hoping that someone outside the police force might uncover something new. Despite significant expenses and countless hours spent reviewing the case, the investigator found no trace of Ben Owens or additional evidence that could lead to Christine's killer. During this time, advancements in forensic technology began to provide hope for cold cases nationwide. Santa Clara's police department partnered with state crime labs to revisit old evidence using new DNA analysis techniques. Christine's case was among those reviewed, but the partial fingerprints and DNA samples from the scarf and crime scene yielded no matches in criminal databases. A few residents of Pacific Shores, where Christine lived, also kept her memory alive. Lydia Palmer, the retired schoolteacher who first discovered the crime scene, organized an annual candlelight vigil on the anniversary of Christine's death. "We can't forget her," Lydia said each year, her voice trembling with emotion. The events were small but heartfelt, with neighbors and friends sharing memories of Christine and renewing calls for justice. Though the years dulled public interest, the Harper family's grief never waned. Margaret, in particular, was haunted by recurring dreams of Christine calling out for help. "I can't rest until we know," she often told her husband. Unbeknownst to the Harpers, their relentless determination and the persistent efforts of investigators would finally pay off. In late 2018, a phone call to a small-town police department in Washington would breathe new life into the case and lead to a shocking revelation. On a quiet autumn morning in October 2018, a call came into the police department in Port Angeles, Washington, a small town nestled near the Canadian border. The voice on the other end was hesitant but firm, belonging to a woman named Rachel Stanton. She claimed to have information about a man she suspected was living under a false identity. "I think he might be someone the police are looking for," Rachel said. "He calls himself Daniel Green, but something doesn't add up." The dispatcher transferred the call to Detective Karen Mills, a seasoned investigator with a knack for piecing together puzzles. Rachel explained that Daniel Green had been her co-worker at a local marina for the past 6 years. She became suspicious after finding old photos in a shared office storage box, which looked drastically different from the person she knew as Daniel. The photos depicted a man with a striking resemblance to someone she had seen on a true crime documentary years ago, Ben Owens, the missing fiancé in the Christine Harper murder case. Detective Mills immediately contacted the Santa Clara Police Department to confirm her suspicions. Within hours, she was on a conference call with Detective Jack Rowland, who, despite his retirement, eagerly joined the conversation. The description Rachel provided, including Ben's distinctive scar on his left hand from a childhood accident, was enough to convince Rowland they were on the right track. Further investigation revealed that Daniel Green's work history and identification documents began in 2012, shortly after Ben Owens' disappearance. Mills and her team conducted discreet surveillance of Daniel, noting his routines and interactions. When officers compared the DMV photo linked to Daniel Green's driver's license with old photos of Ben Owens, the resemblance was undeniable. Daniel's mannerisms, even the way he adjusted his collar when nervous, matched descriptions provided by Christine's friends and family. The pivotal moment came when Rachel, emboldened by her suspicions, managed to secretly record a conversation with Daniel. During the recording, Daniel inadvertently mentioned details about Santa Clara, a place he had no apparent connection to, and a fondness for the beach. A peculiar coincidence given Christine Harper's ties to the Pacific Shores community. Detectives used this recording as the final piece needed to obtain a warrant for Daniel Green's arrest and DNA testing. Armed with the warrant, Detective Mills and a small task force moved quickly to apprehend him at his apartment. When they arrived, Daniel Green opened the door, his expression shifting from confusion to dread as he spotted the officers. "Mr. Owens," one of the officers said firmly, "we need you to come with us." Ben didn't resist. As he was handcuffed, he muttered, "It's been too long. I knew this day would come." Back in Santa Clara, DNA from Ben was tested against evidence collected from Christine Harper's murder scene. The results were a match, confirming that the man who had lived as Daniel Green for nearly a decade was, in fact, Ben Owens, the prime suspect in a crime that had haunted the Harper family for years. Once in custody, Ben Owens, who had been living under the alias Daniel Green, refused to cooperate initially. However, after hours of questioning and mounting evidence, he finally began to crack, revealing a dark and unexpected twist that shocked investigators. Ben admitted to killing Christine, but insisted he hadn't acted alone. He revealed the involvement of a woman named Laura Whitman, someone no one had previously suspected. Laura had been a close friend of Christine's from college, a detail that had gone unnoticed in the original investigation. Though their friendship had drifted over the years, Laura resurfaced in Christine's life shortly before her murder. Ben explained that Laura and Christine had reconnected at a mutual friend's wedding 6 months prior to the crime. Laura, a once successful freelance graphic designer, had fallen on hard times and was desperate for financial help. She knew about Christine's new life, her stable career, and her engagement to Ben, and jealousy began to fester. Ben claimed that Laura reached out to him secretly after meeting Christine. According to Ben, Laura proposed a sinister plan. If Christine were removed from the picture, Ben could inherit her wealth, including her life insurance policy. In exchange, Laura demanded a cut of the money. On the morning of September 12, 2010, Laura allegedly arrived at Christine's home under the pretense of catching up. Christine, trusting her old friend, invited her in. Meanwhile, Ben, who was supposed to be meeting a client, had instead driven to the house and waited nearby. According to Ben, Laura initiated the attack, catching Christine off guard and restraining her. Ben entered shortly after, using the scarf to strangle Christine. He claimed he panicked when she fought back, tightening the scarf until she stopped moving. They then staged the scene to look like a botched robbery. Laura took a few pieces of jewelry as part of the ruse, and Ben placed the call to Christine's parents, feigning shock and grief. After the murder, Ben said he fled to avoid suspicion, cutting all ties with Laura. He created the identity of Daniel Green using forged documents and built a new life in Washington. Laura, on the other hand, seemed to vanish. Investigators later discovered she had changed her name and moved to a small town in Montana, where she worked under the radar. With Ben's confession, detectives worked quickly to locate Laura. Bank records and phone logs from 2010 revealed multiple transactions and calls between Laura and Ben leading up to the murder. Surveillance footage from a pawn shop showed Laura selling some of Christine's missing jewelry weeks after the crime. These findings corroborated Ben's claims of her involvement. On November 15, 2018, Laura Whitman was arrested at her remote cabin in Montana. Unlike Ben, she vehemently denied any involvement in the murder, accusing Ben of fabricating the story to lessen his own culpability. However, the evidence, combined with Ben's confession, painted a damning picture. On November 15, 2018, as the morning sun painted the Montana countryside in shades of gold, law enforcement officers surrounded a secluded cabin near Big Sky. Laura Whitman, the second suspect in the Christine Harper murder case, stepped onto the porch, holding a cup of coffee, unaware that her past had finally caught up with her. "Laura Whitman, you're under arrest for your involvement in the murder of Christine Harper," an officer announced as others moved in swiftly. Laura's initial reaction was one of shock, quickly followed by anger. "This is a mistake," she yelled, her voice cracking. "I don't even know what you're talking about." But the officers, armed with a warrant and a stack of evidence, remained resolute. Laura was handcuffed and escorted to a waiting patrol car. Back in Santa Clara, Laura faced intense questioning. She adamantly denied any involvement in Christine's death, calling Ben Owens a liar and claiming she had no motive to harm her former friend. However, the evidence told a different story. Financial records bank statements showed significant transfers from Laura's account to an untraceable prepaid debit card shortly after Christine's murder. The amounts matched withdrawals Ben had made from Christine's joint account in the weeks before the crime. 2. Jewelry sales surveillance footage from a pawn shop in Sacramento showed Laura selling Christine's missing jewelry. Her signature was also on the pawn shop's transaction records, further linking her to the crime. 3. Phone logs. Investigators uncovered a pattern of calls and text messages between Laura and Ben in the months leading up to the murder. The tone of their messages hinted at a shared secret, with phrases like "we need to stick to the plan," and "it'll all be worth it soon." 4. Forensic evidence. Laura's fingerprints were found on a glass in Christine's kitchen, corroborating Ben's claim that she had been in the house the morning of the murder. Both Ben Owens and Laura Whitman were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. During their trials, the courtroom was packed with journalists, community members, and the Harper family, who sought closure after 8 long years. Ben's defense team attempted to portray him as a man manipulated by Laura's greed and jealousy, painting her as the mastermind. Laura's lawyers countered by accusing Ben of crafting a false narrative to deflect blame entirely onto her. Prosecutors, however, presented a compelling case against both. With Ben's confession, physical evidence, and digital records, the jury found both Ben and Laura guilty. In a dramatic conclusion, they were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Ben and Laura were led out of the courtroom shackles, Christine's parents, Henry and Margaret Harper, embraced each other tightly. While the verdict could never bring their daughter back, it provided the justice they had long fought for. If you enjoyed this dive into the mystery, don't forget to subscribe to True Crime OCS for more chilling stories from history's darkest corners. Drop your thoughts, theories, and questions in the comments below. Let's untangle the truth together. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.